I am so excited for today's video because I'm going to be testing 3 popular methods to cook steaks. The first one is sous vide, secondly is reverse seared, and the last one will be pan sear and finishing it in the oven. Now I'm going to test to see which one I like best and which one maybe produces the best steak. So let's start this experiment. For today's experiment, I'm going to be using some New York strips. My New York strips are about 1 inch thick, and it's important to get them pretty thick because it'll be easier to nail the perfect temperature when you go to cook them. Also, this is a prime, so the marbling is really good here. Try to get the best one you can, you'll just get a better steak experience that way. I will now season these steaks with some salt, and I normally season with some pepper and sometimes garlic powder as well, but I just want to keep it to salt so that I can really taste the beef, and I don't want the garlic or the pepper to affect the crust of the beef whatsoever. So I'll be keeping the taste test to the flavor of the beef. Also, to make sure to season on both sides and on the edges as well. The first steak on the far right will be for sous vide, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in a vacuum seal bag. You don't have to, you can put that in a Ziploc bag if you want, or if you don't have a vacuum seal bag. The second one, or the middle one, will be for reverse sear, so I'm just going to get that on a tray with a cooling rack on it. And lastly, the steak on the leftmost side is for the traditional cook, and I'm just going to leave that out for about an hour to an hour and a half to do 2 things. 1, to dry brine, and 2, to bring it up to temperature because these steaks did come out straight from the fridge, so they are quite cold. You don't want to cook a steak when it's cold because you'll lose a lot of juices that way, and it'll be harder to get the middle of the steak to the temperature you want. If you are using a vacuum seal bag, go ahead and whip out your favorite vacuum sealer and just stick your bag in and hit the button essentially to let it suck out all the air and make a nice seal so that no water will come in, and I suppose so that no juices will go out either. However, if you are using a Ziploc bag, you can use a bowl of water to push out the air in the Ziploc bag. This is not going to create a perfect seal, but it will be good enough. I did this in my sous vide chicken video, so check that one out. Anyways, once your beef is sealed in like this, it's time for the water bath. Now bring a vessel of water with your emergency circulator in there and bring it up to temperature to about 130 degrees to 135 degrees max. This is the medium rare range. And once that comes up to temperature, go ahead and set a timer for 1 hour and 30 minutes. That's how much time it's going to take to cook the steak. And go ahead and put your steak into your water bath and let it cook. Once that is done, you can either leave it in the bath or take it out and just leave it on the side until we're ready to sear it. Speaking of searing, we're going to go ahead and reverse sear the second steak. I'm bringing my oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and all I'm doing is taking a temperature probe and sticking that into the steak about halfway through. I'm going to cook this steak to 125 degrees. That's the medium rare range for me using this method. And I'm just going to cook it for about 1 hour to 1 hour and a half. It depends on your oven, it depends how thick your steaks are, and it depends how cold were they when they went in. However, once the steak hits 125 degrees, I'm going to go ahead and take it out and also leave it on the side until we're ready to sear. Once I am ready to sear, I'm going to take my reverse sear steak and my sous vide steak and pat them dry so that there's not any water left on those steaks, because I want these to have a hard sear on them and not steam when I go to fry them in the pan. Likewise, I'm going to do this for my traditional steak as well. Again, I don't want any moisture on the surface of the steaks. Of course, when I cook steaks, I love to butter baste. So I'm going to cut up about 3 to 4 tablespoons of butter. This is going to be split amongst the 3 steaks. And I'm cutting them into manageable sized pieces so that they can melt in the pan more quickly. And also, I like to add some garlicky flavor by adding fresh garlic. So I'm just going to crush them up and take off the peels. And that's it. You don't need to chop them. To cook the traditional pan seared steak, I'm gonna go ahead and first drizzle a bit of oil on the steak rather than the pan, because I think this gives a more even sear on the steak. This is just me. You can add oil directly to the pan if you want. Make sure you add oil to both sides of the steak if you do add it to the steak though. Once you have done that, get a pan, preferably a cast iron or a carbon steel pan, on medium-high heat until ripping hot, and then add in your steak with the fat cap side down. You want to render out the fat and get it nice and golden like that, and then go ahead and lay in your steak to get that seared. Now press it down so that it has full contact with the pan. Cook it on that side for about 30 seconds. 30 seconds later, go ahead and give it a first flip. As you can see, we've already started developing the sear on that side, so it's starting to brown perfectly. So you're gonna cook it on this side for about 30 seconds, and during this time you're gonna add in your butter and also your garlic, and you're gonna start basting your steak. You're gonna baste this for about 30 seconds on that one side before flipping, and then you're gonna go ahead and give the steak a flip, and then go ahead and baste again for another 30 seconds on that side. And you're gonna repeat this until you flip the steaks for about 4 to 6 times, depending on how brown you want your steaks to be. But for me, once it reaches this stage of brownness, I'm going to take the steak off of the heat and put it on a tray with a cooling rack like this. And I'm also gonna pour all of that buttery goodness with the garlic on top of the steak for the added flavor. This is flavor you do not want to waste at all. I'm going to finish cooking this steak in an oven preheated at 300 degrees Fahrenheit and cooking it until it reaches 135 degrees internal temperature. Get that into an oven, and it should take about 20 to 30 minutes to cook depending on the thickness of your steak. To sear the other two steaks, it's a very similar process. I'm going to go ahead and drizzle some oil into a carbon steel pan or cast iron and get that ripping hot. Once it is ripping hot, I'm going to get the steaks in fat cap side down. Again, I want to render all that fat out first. I pretty much want these steaks to cook in its own fat. Once the fat cap has gotten nice and golden like this, go ahead and lay in the steaks so that they can start searing. Unlike the traditional steak, I'm going to add in the butter and the garlic right at the beginning so that the butter can start browning. And then I'm going to go ahead and give this a flip after it's been cooking for 30 seconds or so. And I'm going to immediately start the basting process. I'm going to do this for 30 seconds on each side, and then I'm going to go ahead and flip it and baste again for another 30 seconds. Just like the traditional cooked steak, I'm going to go ahead and flip this and baste it until I've flipped it for a total of 4 to 6 times, depending on how brown you want your steaks to be. And once your steak is nice and golden, something like this, go ahead and take it off the heat and get it on a tray with a cooling rack so that it can rest a little bit, and pour all of that buttery goodness with the garlic on top again for the added flavor. So now that we have our reverse seared steak and our sous vide steak seared off, we're just waiting for our pan seared steak that we cooked first to finish cooking through. That's gonna take another 5 minutes or so. And once that is done, we'll take it out and we'll let it rest for a few minutes, and then we'll cut it up. And now it is time to cut these steaks up. So first I'm gonna cut this in half, and let's take a look at the doneness. And you know you've cooked it well when it looks nice and pink like this. And now go ahead and cut it into thick slices. I prefer slices that are about ½ inch in thickness. That way the steak doesn't get cold by the time you eat it, and it keeps a lot more of its juiciness that way. And once all of your steaks are sliced up, it is time for the taste test. Okay, let's give these all a try. This is the traditional cooked one. Pretty good cook if I say so myself. All right, cheers. Let's try the sous vide one now. Really good cook there. All right, cheers. And time for the reverse seared. Again, nice and pink. It's perfect. All right, cheers. All right, so I'm gonna start this by saying they're all good. I mean, they're steaks, right? Cooked to medium rare, so of course they're good. If I were served any one of these at a restaurant, I'd be perfectly happy, and I'd actually be happy to pay for any of these. With that said, let's go ahead and break these steaks down. If I had to rate these on whatever is juiciest, I would say these two are equally juicy. This is just very slightly less juicy. Now, crust-wise, this one had the best crust. It's nice and crusty on the outside, like a little chewy on the outside, but the middle is nice and tender. The sous vide one is not as crusty. Because we cooked it sous vide, it had a lot more moisture in that bag, so it naturally held more moisture than these two method does. With the reverse seared, you cook it low and slow in the oven. So by doing that, you dry out the exterior. So when you get to searing it, you actually get a very nice crust on it. You develop the Maillard reaction almost instantly. Also, when you cook it low and slow, I feel like you keep in more moisture, and I'll explain why when I talk about the traditional cooked. Speaking of the sous vide, it's my close second, but it's not my absolute favorite because the sear isn't as good as the reverse seared. And lastly, the traditional cooked one, it's still a very good steak. However, because we started it off in a high heat pan, we contract the muscles a lot faster, therefore you were pushing a lot more moisture out. Now, I'm not saying it's a dry steak, it's still a very tender steak. It's just not as good when compared to the reverse seared. So at the end of the day, I would recommend reverse seared steak. If you have an immersion circulator like a Joule or a Nova or some sort of sous vide equipment, try cooking your steak sous vide. You're gonna enjoy that. This is good too. I think it just requires slightly more skill to make sure that your steak is cooked perfectly and that you're not going to overcook it. Let me know in the comments below, which methods have you tried? Have you tried all of these, some of these, or just one of these? And which one is your favorite? And hit that like button while you're down there. Also, for more videos like this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button or that one right there. And from a previous video, go ahead and hit that one right there. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.